I had exactly 3 inches and 5 seconds before the neurotoxin crossed the threshold of his lips and the Rossi family inherited a graveyard. My fingers, small and trembling, twisted the lace of my white flower girl dress until it felt like a noose. My throat was a desert, every instinct screaming at me to remain a ghost, to stay invisible as I had for 10 years in this house of monsters. Around me, the Rossi gala breathed with the heavy, artificial scent of expensive lilies and old blood. The ballroom was a symphony of clinking crystal, the low vibrato of cello strings, and the dry rustle of silk against marble floors. Outside, the Lake Michigan waves thrashed against the cliffs, cold and honest. But inside this room, the air was thick, cloying, and deceptive. I moved toward the head table like a lamb approaching the butcher's block. Kang Jae Hyuk sat there, looking less like a guest and more like a king waiting for a rebellion. He was carved from obsidian, dark hair swept back, a black suit that cost more than the orphanage I'd been plucked from, and a tattoo snaking up his neck that pulsed with every heartbeat. His hand, heavy with a luxury watch, held the wine glass mid-motion, his fingers drumming a slow, rhythmic death march against the stem. Beside him, Valentina Rossi was a masterpiece of lies. Her blonde hair was pinned back with diamond-crusted precision, and her bold red lips were curved into the perfect shape of a loving fiancé. She watched him with eyes that sparkled like the chandelier above, looking for all the world like a woman in love. She wasn't. 15 minutes ago, I had been a shadow in the rafters. The Rossi ballroom didn't just have high ceilings, it had hidden service catwalks where the unseen staff moved like rats. I'd been tucked behind a velvet curtain, looking for a place to hide from the noise, when I saw her. Valentina hadn't been smiling then. She had been standing over the decanter, her movements clinical and cold. I didn't need to speak Italian to understand the way she tipped that tiny, amber vial into the deep red of the cabernet. I didn't need to be an adult to know that the look on her face wasn't one of affection, it was the look of a predator watching the trap snap shut. The heavy velvet curtains of the service catwalk felt like a thick blanket against my face. Up here, 30 feet above the polished marble floor, I was nothing but a shadow. I was the ghost in the silk, the little girl the Rossi family kept in the corners because I saw too much and said too little. Below me, the gala looked like a swirling ocean of gold and black. My heart hammered against my ribs as I peered through a small gap in the rafters. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be in the kitchen, prep sorting flower petals for the midnight toast. But the Rossi house was full of secrets, and I had learned young that the safest place to be was where no one thought to look. Then, I saw her. Valentina Rossi stood by the mahogany side table, away from the prying eyes of the guests. She looked like a queen in her black dress, her blonde hair shining under the chandeliers. But as she reached into a hidden pocket of her gown, her face changed. The sweet smile she wore for the cameras vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp look that made my skin crawl. She pulled out a tiny glass vial. It was no bigger than my thumb, filled with a liquid that caught the light like a drop of honey. Her hand didn't shake. It was perfectly steady, like a soldier's. With a quick, practiced motion, she tipped the vial over the crystal decanter meant for the head table. I held my breath, afraid that even the sound of my lungs would give me away. The liquid swirled into the dark red wine, disappearing instantly. Valentina waited for a second, watching the wine settle, and then she smoothed her skirts. She looked back toward the ballroom, her mask of the loving fiancé sliding back into place as if nothing had happened. She wasn't just pouring a drink, she was signing a death warrant. I looked toward the head table where Kang Jae Hyuk sat today. He was a stranger, a man from a world I didn't understand, but he was the only one in the room who didn't look like he belonged to the Rosses. He was the target. A cold shiver ran down my spine. In the Rossi house, silence was the only way to stay alive. If I stayed quiet, a man would die. If I spoke, I would be the next one the ghost in the silk saw disappearing into the night. I looked at the locket around my neck, the only thing I had left of my real family, and I knew I couldn't just watch. I had to move. I had to become visible. The air in the ballroom felt like it was made of heavy glass. I climbed down from the rafters, my hands shaking so hard I nearly slipped. I didn't think about the danger. If I thought about it, my feet would stay frozen to the floor. I only thought about the man with the dark tattoo and the golden liquid waiting to steal his life. I stepped out from behind the velvet curtains. I felt small in my white dress, like a single snowflake in a room full of coal. Every step toward the head table felt like a mile. The music seemed to grow louder, the cello strings sounding like a warning. Valentina was sitting next to him now, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She looked perfect. She looked like she belonged there. Jae Hyuk didn't see me at first. He was looking out at the city lights, his fingers still drumming that slow, steady beat on the table. He reached out. His large hand wrapped around the stem of the wine glass. He began to lift it. Stop. The word died in my throat before I could say it. I couldn't yell. Instead, I ran. I darted past a waiter and dove toward his side. I didn't care who saw me. I didn't care about the rules of the Rossi house. I reached him just as the rim of the glass touched his lower lip. I leaned in close, the scent of his expensive cologne mixing with the smell of the wine. I stood on my tiptoes and pressed my face near his ear. Don't drink that. I whispered, my voice cracking with fear. Your fiancé put something in it. The world seemed to stop spinning. Jae Hyuk's hand froze midair. He didn't drop the glass, and he didn't look at Valentina. Instead, he slowly lowered the wine back to the table. He turned his head toward me. His eyes weren't angry or scared. They were calm, sharp, and deeply intrigued. It was like he was looking at a puzzle he hadn't expected to find. Is that so? He asked. His voice was a low rumble that I felt in my chest. Beside him, Valentina's smile didn't fall, but I saw her fingers tighten on her silk napkin. The Rossi mask was starting to crack. Jae Hyuk looked from me to the dark red wine, and then back to me. He didn't call for security. He didn't tell me to leave. He just watched me with those powerful eyes, waiting to see what I would do next. I had broken the silence, and now, there was no going back. The silence at the table was so heavy it felt like it might snap. Valentina's face didn't change at first. She kept that perfect, frozen smile, but her eyes turned into chips of blue ice as she looked at me. Then, she looked at Jae Hyuk. She saw that he wasn't drinking. She saw that he was listening to me. Jae Hyuk, darling, she said, her voice like honey mixed with glass. The poor child is clearly confused. She's just a frightened little girl from the kitchens. She reached out, her hand moving toward the wine glass Jae Hyuk had set down. Her movements were quick and desperate. Just as her fingers touched the stem, she gave a sharp tug. The crystal glass tipped over, crashing against the edge of the mahogany table. It shattered into 1,000 tiny diamonds, and the dark red wine spilled across the white tablecloth like a widening pool of blood. Oh, how clumsy of me, she cried out, her voice too high and too fake. But Jae Hyuk didn't look at the mess. He stayed focused on her, his jaw tight. He knew. Before anyone could breathe, the beautiful ballroom turned into a nightmare. The music stopped with a screeching sound. Men in black suits, Rossi hitmen who had been standing by the doors, reached into their jackets. At the same time, Jae Hyuk's own security team moved like a single shadow. Get down. Jae Hyuk barked. His large hand grabbed the back of my dress and pulled me behind the heavy oak table just as the first pop-pop-pop of gunfire echoed through the room. The screams of the guests filled the air. Crystal chandeliers rattled as bullets hit the walls, sending bits of plaster falling like snow. I huddled on the floor, my hands over my ears, smelling the sharp scent of gunpowder. Valentina was gone, vanished into the crowd of her family's soldiers. Jae Hyuk stood over me, a wall of solid muscle and dark suit. He pulled a silver handgun from his waistband, his eyes scanning the room with deadly calm. He wasn't scared, he was a hunter. He looked down at me for a split second, his expression hard. Stay close to me, little ghost, he whispered over the roar of the chaos. If you want to live, do not let go of my hand. The gala was no longer a party. It was a war zone. The Rosses wanted us dead, and the only way out was through the smoke and the fire. I reached out and grabbed the sleeve of his jacket, clinging to him as the world fell apart around us. The cold night air hit my face like a slap as we boused through the side exit of the estate. Tires screeched against the gravel. A massive black SUV, dark as a shadow and built like a tank, slid to a halt in front of us. Jae Hyuk didn't wait for the driver to hop out. He swung the heavy door open and tossed me into the back seat before climbing in beside me. The door shut with a deep, metallic thud that cut off the sounds of the battle inside. Suddenly, the world was quiet. The only sound was the low hum of the engine and the heavy breathing of the man sitting next to me. As the vehicle sped away from the Rossi mansion, the city lights blurred into long streaks of gold and neon through the tinted glass. Jae Hyuk sat perfectly still. He reached up and loosened his tie, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The glow from the dashboard lit up the sharp lines of his face and the dark ink on his neck. He looked dangerous, even in the silence. "Why did you do it?" he asked suddenly. His voice was quiet, but it filled the small space of the car. He turned his head to look at me, his gaze heavy and curious. "You are a ghost in that house. A nobody. You could have stayed in the rafters and watched me die. You would have been safe." I looked down at my hands. My white dress was stained with gray dust and a splash of red wine. "I don't like monsters," I whispered. And I saw what she did. It wasn't right. Jae Hyuk let out a short, dry laugh that didn't sound happy at all. "You don't like monsters? Little girl, look at who is sitting next to you. In this city, I am the king of monsters. People run when they see my car. They whisper my name in fear." He leaned closer, his dark eyes searching mine. Why would a girl with nothing risk everything to save someone like me? I looked up at him. I saw the expensive watch and the gun tucked into his belt, but I also saw the way he hadn't let go of my hand when the bullets started flying. He had protected me when he didn't have to. "Maybe you're a monster to them," I said, my voice getting stronger. "But to me, you were just a person who was about to be hurt by a liar. I've lived with liars my whole life. I'm tired of them winning." Jae Hyuk stared at me for a long time. For the first time, the hardness in his face softened just a tiny bit. He turned back to the window, watching the dark Chicago streets fly by. "You have a strange heart, Mila Kovacs," he murmured. "In my world, a heart like that usually gets broken. But since you saved my life, I suppose I'll have to make sure yours stays beating." The SUV eventually pulled into a hidden underground garage beneath a tall, silver building. The air here was cool and smelled like clean metal. Jae Hyuk led me toward a glass room filled with glowing computer screens and walls of blinking blue lights. Two men in white coats looked up, their eyes widening when they saw a small girl in a dusty dress standing next to their boss. "Check her," Jae Hyuk ordered, his voice echoing in the quiet room. I pulled back, my hand flying to the silver locket around my neck. "No. This is mine. It's all I have left." Jae Hyuk knelt down so we were eye to eye. "Mila, the Rosses didn't keep you because they were kind. They kept you because of what you are carrying. Let them look." I slowly let go of the chain. One of the experts took the locket with careful fingers. He didn't open the part with the picture of my mother. Instead, he pressed a tiny hidden button on the side. The back of the locket clicked open, revealing a chip no bigger than a fingernail. It was dark and shiny, hidden behind the silver. He plugged the chip into a port on the main computer. Suddenly, the screens around us turned bright red. Rows of code and strange maps began to scroll past so fast I couldn't read them. The experts gasped, their faces turning pale. "Sir," one of the men whispered, his voice shaking. "This isn't just a locket. This is an encrypted data drive. It contains the codes for the Rossi family's biological weapons project. It's the data the world has been looking for 5 years." Jae Hyuk stood up slowly, his face becoming a mask of cold stone. He looked at the screen, then back at me. I felt a chill run down my spine. I thought I was just a flower girl, but I was carrying a secret that could start a war. "The Rosses aren't just hunting me anymore," Jae Hyuk said, his voice low and dangerous. "They are hunting her. This girl is now the most valuable person in Chicago. Every assassin in the city will be looking for this locket." I looked at the tiny chip. It felt like a mountain of lead was sitting on my chest. I had saved Jae Hyuk from a poisoned drink, but now I realized that my whole life had been a trap. I wasn't just a ghost anymore. I was a target. Jae Hyuk stepped between me and the screens, his shadow covering me completely. He looked like a king protecting his most precious treasure, but his eyes told me that the real fight was only just beginning. The days that followed were quiet, but they were not calm. I lived in a room high up in Jae Hyuk's tower. It was a beautiful place, but it felt like a golden cage. I spent my time watching the clouds pass by, wondering if I would ever be just a normal girl again. But Jae Hyuk had other plans for me. He didn't want me to just sit and wait. One evening, he called me into his large office. The room was dark, lit only by the glowing city lights outside. On his desk were dozens of photographs of people I didn't know. He wasn't looking at his phone or his computer. He was looking at me. In my world, Mila, The most dangerous weapon isn't a gun, he said, his voice smooth and low. It is information. People think children are invisible. They talk freely when a nobody is in the room. You used that skill to save my life. Now, I want you to use it to save ours. He began to show me how to look at things differently. He taught me how to read the tells on a person's face, the tiny twitch of an eye that meant a lie, or the way a hand tightened when someone was nervous. He showed me how to listen to the rhythm of a conversation to find the hidden meaning behind the words. You are small, and you are quiet, he whispered, standing behind me as I studied the photos. That is your power. You can go where my soldiers cannot. You can hear things that a microphone would miss. He started to give me small tasks. He would have me sit in the corner of his meetings, disguised as a quiet student doing homework. Afterward, he would ask me what I saw. I told him about the man who kept checking his watch, and the woman who wouldn't look him in the eye. I became his eyes and ears in the shadows. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a ghost that people ignored. I felt like a secret weapon. Jae Hyuk wasn't just protecting me anymore, he was training me. I was learning that being invisible didn't mean you were weak. It meant you were the only one who knew the truth before the war even started. I wasn't just a witness to his world, I was becoming a part of it. The tower felt safe until the lights went out. It happened at exactly 3 a.m. The humming computers in the hallway died, and the city lights outside the window seemed to vanish. I sat up in bed, my heart thumping against my ribs. In the Rossi house, silence meant a secret. In Jae Hyuk's house, silence meant a trap. I didn't wait. I crawled under the bed, pressing my back against the cold floor just like Jae Hyuk had taught me. A few seconds later, the door to my room creaked open. I saw 2 pairs of heavy black boots step onto the carpet. They weren't wearing the silver pins that Jae Hyuk's guards wore. These men were strangers. Where is the girl? A voice hissed. It was a woman's voice, Valentina. She wasn't wearing a ball gown anymore. I could see the edge of a dark leather jacket as she moved toward the closet. The locket is the only thing that matters. Find her and get that chip. One of the men reached for the bed, but suddenly, the room exploded with light. A flashbang grenade went off in the hallway, and the door was kicked open. Jae Hyuk burst in, his shadow long and terrifying in the doorway. He didn't look like a businessman, he looked like a god of war. The fight was over in seconds. Jae Hyuk moved faster than the eye could see. He tackled the man by the bed while his guards surrounded Valentina. But as the guards grabbed her, one of them didn't point his gun at her. He pointed it at Jae Hyuk's back. Don't move, boss, the guard said. His voice was shaking. It was Han, the man who usually guarded the front elevator. He had been with Jae Hyuk for years. Everything froze. Valentina laughed, a cold and sharp sound. Did you really think I only had my own family on my side, Jae Hyuk? Your own men know when a king is about to fall. I saw the look on Jae Hyuk's face. It wasn't fear, it was a deep, cold sadness. The betrayal went deeper than just a lying fiancé. His own organization was rotting from the inside. Han, Jae Hyuk said, his voice like ice. I gave you everything. She offered me more, Han whispered. But Han had forgotten about the ghost in the room. I reached out from under the bed and grabbed the heavy metal base of the bedside lamp. With all my strength, I slammed it against Han's ankle. He cried out in pain, his aim wavering for just a second. That was all Jae Hyuk needed. He spun around and disarmed Han in one smooth motion. Valentina and Han were dragged away into the darkness, but the victory felt hollow. Jae Hyuk stood in the middle of the room, looking at the empty space where his trusted guard had stood. He realized now that he couldn't trust his walls or his soldiers. He could only trust the little girl who was currently crawling out from under the bed, still clutching a lamp. The Rossi estate looked different through the windshield of an armored truck. It no longer looked like a palace, it looked like a target. Snow fell heavily, blurring the rows of expensive cars parked along the driveway. Inside, the music was playing again, a second gala meant to celebrate Jae Hyuk's death and the rise of the Rossi Empire. They didn't know the king was still alive, and they didn't know a ghost was coming for them. This is the spot, Jae Hyuk whispered. We were parked in the shadows behind the tall stone walls. He handed me a small headset and a pair of dark gloves. The main gates are locked from the inside by a computer system. My men can't get through the front without an army. You have to get to the control room. I nodded, my throat tight. I wasn't the scared girl in the white dress anymore. I wore a dark jumpsuit that blended into the night. Jae Hyuk squeezed my shoulder. Remember what I taught you. You are a shadow. Shadows don't make noise. I climbed out of the truck and moved toward the hidden air vent near the gardens. I had used this vent many times as a child to hide from the Rossi guards. It was small, dusty, and smelled like old metal. I crawled through the narrow tunnel, my knees scraping against the iron. Above me, I could hear the muffled sound of people laughing and glasses clinking. They were celebrating a victory they hadn't earned. I reached a metal grate that looked down into the security hub. Below me, 2 guards were leaning back in their chairs, watching the monitors and laughing. They weren't paying attention. I carefully unscrewed the bolts of the grate, making sure they didn't clatter against the floor. I dropped down silently, landing like a cat behind a row of tall computer towers. My heart was racing, but my hands were steady. I found the main control panel, just where Jae Hyuk said it would be. I pulled the small locket from my pocket. It wasn't just a data drive, it was also a key. I plugged the chip into the security port. The screen suddenly flickered from blue to red. The words "Gates Open" flashed across the monitors. A loud, deep hum echoed through the walls as the massive steel front gates swung wide. The guards jumped up, reaching for their radios, but it was too late. The sound of heavy engines roared outside. Jae Hyuk's trucks were charging through the entrance like a wrecking ball. I didn't stay to watch. I scrambled back up into the vents. The ghost in the silk had just opened the door for the storm, and the Rosses were about to find out that the person they ignored was the one who would bring their empire down. The sun began to rise over Chicago, turning the smoke from the Rossi estate into a pale, glowing orange. The chaos was over. The hallways that used to feel so scary and full of secrets were now silent, filled only with the heavy boots of Jae Hyuk's men. Valentina and the rest of the Rosses were gone, their empire crumbled like a house of sand. I stood on the front lawn, my dark jumpsuit covered in dust from the vents. The cold morning wind blew against my face, but I didn't shiver. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to hide. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I watched as Jae Hyuk walked toward me, his black coat flapping in the wind. He looked tired, but his eyes were bright with a new kind of light. He stopped in front of me and looked down. He didn't see a witness or a tool. He saw me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out my silver locket. The data chip was gone, safely stored away, but the picture of my mother was still inside. He leaned down and fastened the chain around my neck once more. "The Rossi name is finished," he said, his voice firm and loud enough for everyone to hear. "And so is the life where you had to hide in the shadows. From this day on, you are not a flower girl or a servant. You are a Kang." He placed a hand on my shoulder, and it felt like a shield. "I am officially adopting you into my family, Mila. You saved my life, and you protected my empire when my own men would not. You are my heir." I looked up at him, and for the first time, I didn't see a monster. I saw a father. I realized that I had finally found the home I had been searching for. I wasn't just a stray dog looking for safety anymore. I was a princess in a world of giants. "No one will ever look past you again," Jae Hyuk promised, his voice softening just for me. "And no one will ever ignore you. If they try, they will have to answer to me." As we walked toward the waiting black SUV, I looked back at the Rossi house one last time. The shadows were gone. I took Jae Hyuk's hand, stepping into my new life. The little girl who ran to the boss had finally stopped running. I was finally home.